Rhonda screamed until her tiny lungs gave out. For 3 relentless hours, her cries rattled the first-class cabin like an alarm no one could turn off. Lawrence Smith, a man who'd once stared down a $6 billion hostile takeover without flinching, now sat sweating through his designer suit, utterly defeated by 9 pounds of fury. Flight attendants hovered helplessly. Passengers glared. Somewhere over Denver, his composure cracked. Then the man across the aisle moved. Gino Chiellini, slick pinstripe suit, gold chain glinting against olive skin, leaned over the armrest, his expression calm, almost amused. "Mind if I try?" he asked, voice low but confident. Before Lawrence could protest, Gino extended one hand toward the wailing child. And just like that, the crying stopped. Rhonda blinked up at him, hiccuped once, and reached for his gold watch like it was a toy made just for her. The cabin went silent. A woman 2 rows back whispered, "He's the one from the papers." But no one dared breathe too loud. Gino smiled faintly, tapping a soft rhythm on the armrest. Each tap matched her heartbeat. Each pause made her tiny chest rise calmer, slower, peaceful. Lawrence couldn't believe it. A billionaire with access to the world's best pediatricians, sound engineers, and calming apps. Undone by a man whose name appeared on FBI watch lists. Rhonda giggled, the sound light and foreign, as if she'd saved it for him alone. "Guess she just needed someone who speaks her language," Gino murmured. No one said another word for the rest of the flight. But to understand how this impossible moment happened, how a crying child and a feared mafia boss ended up saving each other, we need to go back to the start. Back to the day Lawrence Smith thought he was boarding a simple cross-country flight and met the man who would change his life forever. Before we begin, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more exciting stories that you won't want to miss. The sound was so soft at first, Lawrence thought he imagined it. A faint, rhythmic tap-tap-tap coming from the armrest between Gino and Rhonda. The baby's tiny fingers mimicked the motion almost instantly. Her eyes locked on Gino's large, gold-ringed hand. She wasn't just calm, she was enchanted, her cries replaced by quiet, breathy coos. Gino leaned back with the kind of relaxed confidence that didn't come from charm, but from knowing he was always the most dangerous man in the room. Lawrence watched with cautious awe, unable to reconcile the man in front of him with what he knew, or thought he knew. Gino Chiellini, rumored to be heir to the Chiellini crime family of Brooklyn, was stroking his daughter's palm like he was born to soothe. The rhythmic tapping turned into a subtle pattern, like a lullaby without melody, just tempo, intention, and timing. It wasn't a trick. It was something deeper, older, like instinct passed down in blood. Rhonda responded in kind, slapping her open palm against Lawrence's thigh in the same beat, like she'd just been waiting for someone to show her how to keep time. Her head bobbed. Her body relaxed. A small grin crept across her cheeks as she grabbed Gino's thumb and held on tight. Lawrence's heart squeezed, torn between awe and a rising discomfort he couldn't yet name. "You some kind of baby whisperer?" Lawrence muttered, his voice low so as not to break the spell. Gino didn't look at him, just watched Rhonda with a softness that startled Lawrence. "Nah," he said after a moment. "I just know the beat she's already got inside her. You just gotta sync up with it." The tapping slowed. Gino began to hum, low and steady, more breath than melody, but enough to send a visible wave of calm through the child. Rhonda blinked sleepily now, her fingers still tracing his hand. Lawrence leaned back, unsure whether to be grateful or unnerved. He looked around and noticed the flight attendants watching, murmuring behind their service curtain. One of them, the redhead with the clipped accent, nudged the other and whispered, "That's him, Chiellini, from the news." Lawrence caught that word like a knife to the ribs. Of course he knew the name. Everyone in high finance did. The Chiellini family wasn't just a rumor, it was an institution. Gino's father had run the docks in Newark, his uncle had vanished during the RICO trials, and now the son, the one they said wore suits like armor and never raised his voice, was sitting next to his baby daughter, calming her, lulling her. Gino stretched his neck side to side and finally turned his full attention to Lawrence. "You tense up every time someone says my name," he said, not with hostility but amusement. "You worried I'm gonna plot a Tommy gun or a pacifier?" Lawrence said nothing, which seemed to amuse him more. "Relax, Mr. Smith. I got my hands full with the boss lady here." Rhonda babbled in soft, sleepy tones, her little hand resting atop Gino's, as if she'd claimed him. Lawrence studied the way she looked at him, not with fear, not even with curiosity, but familiarity, like her body remembered him. Gino glanced down at her and added, "She's got rhythm in her bones, same kind my nana said ran in the family." Something about the way he said it made Lawrence tilt his head. "Your grandmother?" he asked, surprised. "Palermo," Gino replied, tapping the beat again softly. "Taught me to drum before I could walk. Said rhythm's the first language. Said if someone doesn't hear you when you speak, make them feel you instead." There was a silence between them then, not uncomfortable, but thick with something unspoken. Gino's tone had changed. The glint in his eye was still sharp, but now layered with something gentler. He wasn't trying to impress. He was remembering. The man everyone feared was suddenly a boy at a kitchen table, beating rhythms on a wooden spoon. She used to say some kids scream because the world never learns to listen. Lawrence didn't know what to say to that. He looked down at his daughter, now dozing off against Gino's arm. She hadn't been this calm in days. Not since the fever last week. Not since the doctor told him it was probably just adjustment anxiety and handed him a prescription for himself instead of his daughter. "You ever have kids?" Lawrence asked suddenly. Gino didn't answer at first. He reached down to adjust Rhonda's blanket, tugging it gently over her belly. "Almost," he said, finally. His voice was steady but distant now. "She left before I ever got the chance to find out. One of those things." Lawrence was no stranger to loss. He felt it in Gino's words, even if the man tried to brush past it. There was something about the way he looked at Rhonda now that wasn't just affection. It was regret. It was memory. It was wondering who might have looked like her once upon a time. Flight attendants resumed walking the aisles. Most passengers avoided looking in their direction, but some still stole glances. One older man pulled his phone out and tilted it subtly toward Gino's seat, trying to sneak a picture. Gino caught him in the reflection of his cufflink. He didn't say anything, he just turned slightly, angling himself to shield Rhonda's face from the lens. Lawrence noticed. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "Sure I did," Gino replied. "People love to stare at monsters. But she's not part of my myth." There was steel under those words. It made Lawrence shiver. But not from fear. From the sudden, jarring realization that this man, who wore danger like a second skin, had more protectiveness in his voice than Lawrence had ever felt from his own father. The plane gave a subtle lurch. A little turbulence. Rhonda stirred, frowning in her sleep. Gino adjusted her again, one hand steady on her back. "This part used to scare me as a kid," he said. "Thought the clouds were going to swallow us whole." Lawrence raised a brow. "You flew a lot?" Gino chuckled. "Nah. First time I flew was in cuffs. Window seat, though. Silver linings." Lawrence exhaled a soft laugh to spite himself. "You're not what I expected," he admitted. Gino shrugged. "People rarely are." He looked down at Rhonda, his voice softening again. "Especially her. She's going to be fire when she gets older, you can tell." Lawrence felt a pang in his chest. The kind that had nothing to do with fear or pride. Just longing. For connection. For understanding. For the chance to be the father he kept pretending to already be. "You're good with kids," he said, more to himself than to Gino. "How?" Gino looked at him with eyes darker than his suit. "Because I used to be one nobody listened to." They said nothing for a while after that. Just the soft thrum of the engines and the even softer sound of Rhonda breathing, her small chest rising in rhythm to Gino's tapping. It was a lullaby without music, a cradle made of presence. And for the first time in days, Lawrence let himself close his eyes, not to sleep, but to listen. The wheels touched down with a gentle thud, and Lawrence felt a strange mix of relief and hesitation. Rhonda was still asleep in her carrier, her tiny hand curled around the strap of Gino's watch, a grip she refused to let go of, even as the engine slowed. Passengers began to gather their things, murmuring quietly as they eyed the two men in pinstripes seated on opposite sides of the aisle. Gino leaned back, his face unreadable, his posture relaxed in a way that made everyone else nervous. Lawrence hadn't said much since that strange exchange midair, but the question brewing in his mind hadn't left him since. As they disembarked through the private exit at the far end of the terminal, Lawrence nodded to one of his security men waiting by the gate. "Black Mercedes, curbside. Take Mr. Chiellini wherever he needs to go," he said quietly. Gino glanced at the suited guard, then at Lawrence, his expression unreadable. "Appreciate the offer," he said with a slight smile, "but I've got my own ride waiting." Lawrence hesitated. "It's a gesture, not a leash." They walked slowly through the terminal, Rhonda dozing in the chest-slung carrier across Lawrence's torso. Her mouth opened slightly with each sleepy breath, and her fingers still brushed now and then toward the space where Gino had been. The man himself walked beside them, hands in his pockets, a sharp contrast to the watchful security men flanking their path. His polished shoes made no sound, but his presence filled every step with weight. "She's a good kid," Gino said softly. "Got a quiet kind of fire in her." Lawrence nodded, unsure how to respond. Compliments from strangers rarely carried this much gravity. "You have nieces or something?" he asked, hoping to shift the weight of the moment. Gino smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Nah, just knew a kid once. She used to hold my thumb like that." There was a long silence as they passed through the glossy marble terminal, their footsteps echoing beneath the soaring ceilings. Gino glanced sideways. "You ever been in love, Mr. Smith?" Lawrence blinked at the suddenness of it. "Yes," he answered cautiously. "A long time ago, before things got complicated." Gino's smile turned wistful. "Her name was Carla," he said, almost to himself. "She had this way of laughing like she didn't trust it, like joy had to sneak up on her. We were 19. Summer job in San Francisco. She left without a goodbye." Lawrence's steps faltered for just a second. "Carla?" he repeated, the name scraping across his memory like a key on glass. "Short, curly hair? Worked at a tiny startup that folded in? 95? Gino raised his eyebrows in amused surprise. "You knew her?" he asked, clearly not expecting the reaction. Lawrence felt a rush of something cold and electric bloom in his chest. "I knew her," Lawrence said slowly. "We dated right before my first IPO. She left suddenly. No explanation." His voice drifted, narrowing into memory. Gino watched him, his expression tightening just enough to betray something deeper. "Funny," Gino said after a pause. "She told me she was going home to her parents, that she had to figure something out. That was the last time I saw her." They stood there, silent in the middle of the terminal, as business travelers and vacationers streamed past in both directions. Rhonda stirred gently against Lawrence's chest, her breath catching before settling again. "It could be coincidence," Lawrence said, not believing it for a second. "Could be," Gino agreed, but the edge in his voice said otherwise. "Could be a lot of things." A black town car idled at the curb outside the terminal. A driver in a charcoal suit stepped out and opened the door without a word. Gino glanced toward it, then back at Lawrence. "She said she was pregnant," he said casually, like he was testing the weight of the sentence on his tongue. "I thought she was bluffing, trying to keep me from leaving." Lawrence's world narrowed into a pinpoint. His throat went dry. Carla had disappeared not long after she'd stopped returning his calls. She'd told him she wasn't ready for the kind of life he was building. He thought it was about the pressure, the money, the IPO. But now, Gino reached into his jacket and pulled out a small silver lighter, flicking it once before pocketing it again. "Maybe it's nothing," he said, "but maybe not." Rhonda stirred again, her head shifting toward the sound of his voice, even in sleep. "She likes you," Lawrence said quietly. "More than she likes anyone else." Gino didn't smile this time. "Maybe she remembers something the rest of us forgot." The driver cleared his throat softly, glancing between them. Gino stepped toward the car. "Thanks for the company," he said, "and the rhythm." Lawrence said nothing. He couldn't. He was still reeling from a truth that hadn't yet been confirmed, but had already burrowed deep in his gut. As the car door closed behind him, Gino leaned his head out the window. "If she ever wants to drum again," he said, "you've got my number." And then the car pulled away, swallowed by the traffic and the blinding sun beyond the terminal's overhang. Lawrence stood there long after the car disappeared, one hand resting protectively over Rhonda's back. The baby slept soundly, but Lawrence's mind spun in silent chaos. The timeline, the pregnancy, the disappearance. Was it possible everything he thought he knew about Carla and about his own child was wrong? Inside him, a slow and terrible suspicion began to form. And for the first time since Rhonda was born, Lawrence wasn't thinking like a billionaire. He was thinking like a father. What would you do if a stranger calmed your child and then mentioned the one name from your past you'd buried long ago? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Who do you think Carla's baby really was? The screaming started again 3 nights after the flight. At first, Lawrence told himself it was jet lag, a baby adjusting to a new time zone and schedule. But as the night stretched on, the cries became worse, piercing, panicked, primal. Rhonda would wake at exactly 2:37 a.m., writhing in her crib as if something invisible had grabbed her by the ears and refused to let go. Her shrieks shook the monitors, and the mansion's walls might as well have been made of paper. Lawrence tried everything: white noise machines, humidifiers, warm milk bottles, swaddling techniques, lavender oil, lullabies sung off-key at 3 a.m. by a man who hadn't slept in a suit since the dot-com crash. Nothing worked. Rhonda screamed like she was being torn in two, and nothing, no touch, no tone, no therapy, could soothe her. Specialists returned his calls within the hour. Money had its privileges. The country's top pediatric sleep consultants, trauma therapists, even an infant acupuncturist, all filed through the Smith estate like a traveling circus of white coats and furrowed brows. One by one, they walked away puzzled, sometimes humbled, always quiet. "There's nothing wrong with her," they said. "Medically, she's perfect." But Lawrence could see it wasn't perfect. He saw it in her eyes, how they searched the corners of the room like something was chasing her from inside. He saw it in the way her tiny hands clenched into fists every time an airplane flew overhead. She wasn't just reacting, she was remembering. Something hurt her, and no one could explain what. He began to doubt everything: the birth records, the hospital notes, even the nurses who used to coo over Rhonda in her warmer at Cedars-Sinai. Carla had always been a mystery, a brief chapter in his life wrapped in laughter, fire, and then smoke. Her exit had been clean, too clean. No drama, just silence. Now that silence screamed through Rhonda's lungs every night. The household staff whispered behind his back. Nannies came and went. One lasted a week, another 2 days. The last one quit at dawn, her face pale as she handed over Rhonda, still red-faced and gasping. "It's like she's in pain," she whispered, "but there's no wound." On the 6th night, Lawrence sat beside the crib, holding Rhonda to his chest, tears streaking silently down his cheeks. He hated crying, hated what it did to his face. But something about the sound of his daughter's agony cracked him open from the inside. "What are you trying to tell me?" he whispered into her hair. "What don't I see?" The next morning, he canceled every meeting for the week. No board calls, no quarterly briefings, just Rhonda, just the mystery, just the ache in his gut that something about her, something in her, was out of place. It was a nurse from Zurich who made the first real suggestion. She'd worked with children from multilingual refugee families, many of whom suffered from sudden onset pain, with no clear source. "Have her ears checked," she said gently, "by a real pediatric audiologist, not one of those Beverly Hills generalists, someone who knows how to listen beyond the charts." Lawrence flew in Dr. Elisa Fortini from Milan. The woman arrived in loafers, a gray scarf, and no tolerance for nonsense. She sat on the nursery floor for 3 hours, watching Rhonda cry, hum, tap, and eventually fall asleep mid-whimper. Then she sat beside Lawrence at the grand piano and said 2 words that made his blood turn cold. "Inner pressure." "What does that mean?" Lawrence asked. "It means her ears interpret altitude changes differently," Fortini explained. "Small shifts in air pressure feel like gunshots to her brain. It's rare, very rare, almost entirely isolated to certain Sicilian bloodlines." Lawrence sat very still. "You're saying it's genetic?" Dr. Fortini nodded. "I've only seen it twice in my life. Both cases had markers that trace back to a specific region in Palermo. There's a rhythm, a pattern, in how the auditory nerves form. It's not harmful with the right treatment. But it doesn't come from nowhere." His hands trembled slightly as he walked her to the door, thanked her, and asked his assistant to contact a private genealogist before she'd even pulled out of the driveway. He requested full ancestral tracing, not just for Rhonda, but for himself. Every strand, every marker. And quietly, without informing anyone, he added a second name to the test request: Gino Chiellini. The results came back in 10 days. Lawrence opened the file in his study with shaking fingers, half hoping it would prove him paranoid. But science wasn't in the business of wishful thinking. There it was, in black and white. Rhonda bore a mitochondrial marker, not present in Lawrence's bloodline, but it was present in the Chiellini lineage. A rare auditory mutation passed only through maternal lines originating in western Sicily. He stared at the screen for an entire hour. Rhonda's scream rang in his ears like an echo now. It wasn't just pain, it was her body trying to say something. And finally, Lawrence understood. She was screaming the truth. Carla hadn't been pregnant with his child. She had been pregnant with someone else's. With someone who tapped rhythms on armrests and held babies like he remembered how it felt to be one. With someone named Chiellini. The name hit differently now. Not like a headline, not like a threat. Like family. The kind you don't choose, but might have to face anyway. Lawrence stood in the nursery that night, watching Rhonda sleep soundlessly for the first time in weeks. The silence was almost as unnerving as her cries had been. His hand pressed to the glass of her crib as the truth settled deep in his bones. He wasn't just raising a daughter, he was raising someone else's legacy. If you discovered the child you've loved and raised might not be yours by blood, would you still fight for them the same way? Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happens when truth knocks twice. The Chiellini Social Club didn't have a sign out front. Just a deep burgundy awning and two men in black suits who knew who belonged and who didn't. Lawrence stepped out of the town car, nodded at the doorman, and walked in like he had every right to be there. Inside, the walls were wood-paneled, the air smoky, the lighting low and golden. The scent of aged whiskey and old secrets floated through the room like perfume. Gino sat at a table in the back, surrounded by silence. No entourage. No theatrics. Just a lowball glass of bourbon, half gone, and a lit cigar in his left hand. He didn't look surprised when Lawrence approached. "I figured you'd come eventually," he said, not moving. Lawrence slid into the booth across from him, resting his hands on the table like they were in a negotiation. "I got the results," he said without ceremony. "DNA markers. Sicilian origin. Passed through maternal lines. Not mine." Gino took a long drag from his cigar and exhaled slowly. "I'm not shocked." "You're not?" Lawrence snapped, his voice sharper than intended. Gino tilted his head. "You think I didn't feel it the second she grabbed my hand?" he said, tapping two fingers on the wood. "That rhythm's in the blood. I've heard it before. Just didn't want to admit it." Lawrence leaned back, unsure whether to punch the man or thank him. "Carla never told me," he said. "She vanished before I could ask why." Gino nodded, the regret plain in his expression. "She vanished on me too. One minute we were fire, the next, ash." "I thought she left because of the pressure," Lawrence muttered half to himself. "The IPO, the money, the public eye." Gino gave a hollow laugh. "She didn't care about any of that. Carla was scared. But not of success, of what it would cost." Lawrence stared at him, pulse thudding like a warning drum. "Why didn't she tell either of us?" Gino shrugged. "Maybe she wanted to protect the baby from both our worlds. Yours, too white and too loud. Mine, too dark and too quiet." He flicked ash into a crystal tray. "Maybe she thought we'd ruin her." "Instead," Lawrence said, voice low, "she left her with no one." Gino's eyes flicked up. "No, she left her with you." He pointed the cigar toward him. "And don't pretend that didn't matter. Because I've seen that little girl reach for you in her sleep." The table fell into silence, dense and difficult. Lawrence swallowed hard. "She's mine. I know that sounds ridiculous now, but..." He didn't finish. Gino nodded slowly. "She's yours, in all the ways that count." "And yet," Lawrence said, the edge returning, "you walk onto a plane and calm her like you've known her since the womb. That's not coincidence. That's blood calling blood." Gino leaned forward, his face suddenly serious. "You want me to say it? Fine. I think she's mine too. Or, close enough. Carla's blood. My family's blood. Doesn't matter how the math shakes out." Lawrence felt something twist in his chest. Anger, jealousy, relief, love, all tangled like wires behind a wall. "So what now?" he asked, voice soft. "You want custody?" Gino barked a laugh, then coughed once. "Hell no," he said. I've got enough surveillance on me without dragging a baby into it. I'm not here to take anything. I just wanted her to stop crying. Lawrence looked down at his hands, remembering Rhonda's scream piercing the sky above Denver, remembering how Gino had reached for her without hesitation. You didn't even flinch, he said. You knew what to do. Gino nodded. Guess I've been calming down my own blood this whole time. The words hit like thunder in a quiet room. Lawrence closed his eyes for a beat. Gino took another sip of bourbon and let the silence linger. You ever wonder, he said, how different life would have been if Carla hadn't run? Lawrence nodded slowly. Every day since that plane touched down. Gino stubbed out the cigar. She's not broken, he said softly now. That little girl's got more strength in her than either of us did at her age. She just needs rhythm. And someone who hears her. He paused. You hear her, right? Lawrence nodded, eyes stinging. I do now. Gino smiled. Not smug. Something softer. Like he was giving permission, not seeking validation. Good. Then she's safe with you. Always was. Lawrence stood, his breath shaky but even. I don't know what this makes us, he said. Me neither, Gino replied, standing as well. But I think it makes her lucky. They looked at each other for a long moment, two men from rival worlds standing on the fragile bridge of a child's heartbeat. Come by sometime, Lawrence said. She asks about you, not in words, but in ways I can't explain. Gino tilted his head. You sure that's a good idea? Lawrence cracked a smile for the first time in days. I'm starting to think good ideas are overrated. They walked out of the club in silence. No handshakes, no dramatic parting lines. Just a quiet understanding that something important had shifted. Outside, the night air felt different. Lighter. Like maybe, for once, the past didn't own the future. The black SUV pulled up the winding drive just after noon, tires crunching softly over the gravel like it had been here before. Lawrence watched from the upstairs study window, Rhonda perched on his hip, her head resting against his chest. As the door opened and Gino stepped out, dressed in a dark blazer and no tie, Rhonda lifted her head. She didn't cry, she didn't smile. But she leaned forward, arms stretching toward the man on the front lawn like she recognized a beat the rest of the world had forgotten. Lawrence opened the door before Gino had even reached the steps. No security detail, no formal greeting. Just two men standing on a porch shaped by wealth and silence, trying to unlearn what they thought they knew. She remembers, Lawrence said, shifting Rhonda gently. Gino smiled, and it was the same one that had disarmed half the cabin on that cross-country flight. Course she does, I told you. Rhythm leaves a mark. Inside, Rhonda reached for him instantly. Gino didn't hesitate. He took her in his arms like it was the most natural thing in the world. No awkward transitions, no coaxing. Her cries, which had returned off and on since the test results, fell away like smoke. She pressed her cheek to his chest, eyes fluttering, body still. Lawrence stood there, watching it unfold like a scene from someone else's life. This wasn't supposed to be happening. But the truth was, it had already happened, and it was happening again. Rhonda wasn't confused, she was safe. And for the first time, Lawrence admitted he felt the same. They spent the afternoon in the garden. Rhonda cradled in Gino's lap under the filtered sunlight of an autumn afternoon. Gino pulled small wooden toys from a paper bag. Simple blocks, 2 spoons, and a miniature hand drum no bigger than his palm. Made it myself, he said, gently setting the drum between her legs. Same kind Nona used to teach me on. At first, she tapped it like any baby would. Accidental, soft. But Gino showed her slowly. Tap, pause, tap tap, smile. A pattern emerged. Not just noise, but intention. Within minutes, she was copying it and then creating her own version. Lawrence watched from the patio, something loosening behind his ribs. She was communicating, not with words, not with tears, but with rhythm, with joy. He hadn't seen her this light since before the screaming began. This wasn't therapy. This was memory, blood, and trust made audible. You ever think she remembers the sound? Gino asked later, once Rhonda had crawled to the edge of a playmat and collapsed into sleep. From inside, Carla? Lawrence nodded, sipping from the tumbler of whiskey he'd brought out after dinner. Babies hear everything. Carla used to hum in the shower, always off-key. He paused. She said I hummed in my sleep. Maybe Rhonda's heard 100 lullabies before she ever saw a crib. The fire pit crackled softly between them, the flames casting uneven light on their faces. "You know what my grandmother used to say?" Gino asked, swirling his drink. "Music skips the mouth. Goes straight from the soul to the bones." Lawrence chuckled under his breath. "Is that a Chiellini proverb?" "Nah," Gino said. "Just something you learn when your family has more ghosts than photo albums." They sat in silence after that, the kind that felt earned, not awkward. Somewhere inside, the baby monitor clicked and glowed. Rhonda had stirred, then quieted again. Lawrence tipped his glass toward it. "She knows we're talking." Gino nodded. "She always did." Later, as the fire burned low, Lawrence asked the question he'd been avoiding since their last meeting. "Why didn't you push?" Gino looked at him, eyes half-lidded. "For what?" "Rights, custody, hell, even answers." Gino set his glass down. "Because I don't need a title to protect what's mine. And I know she doesn't need more noise. Just rhythm." That line stuck with Lawrence long after the night ended. When they returned inside, Rhonda was sitting upright in her crib, blinking as if waiting for a cue. Gino stepped close, tapped twice on the side of the crib. She giggled. Unforced, full-throated, real. Her fingers tapped the rail in return, matching him beat for beat. Lawrence didn't interrupt. He just watched, the moment painting itself into memory like music you know you'll never forget. Gino looked over his shoulder. "She's got it in her bones." "So do you," Lawrence said quietly. "Maybe that's what brought you here." Gino tilted his head. "Nah, she brought me here." For the first time, Lawrence realized he didn't resent that. Later, as the house fell into sleep and the whiskey began to wear off, Lawrence stood at Rhonda's crib alone. Her drum lay beside her like a teddy bear. Her tiny hands twitched, even in sleep, still keeping rhythm. He reached down, pressed 2 fingers against the crib rail, and tapped twice. The corners of her mouth curled upward, just slightly. The day began with sunlight and the sound of small hands drumming the edge of her crib. Rhonda was smiling again, more often now, and not just with her mouth, but her whole body. Lawrence had started to wake before her, just to see the way her arms reached toward the ceiling like she was catching morning music. Gino was due to visit again that evening. The rhythm was becoming routine. Unexpectedly, unbelievably, they were starting to feel like a family. That was the moment the knock came. Sharp, not urgent, but deliberate enough to change the air in the house. Lawrence opened the front door and saw 2 men in black suits with government-grade stillness. The kind that didn't smile. One flashed a badge before even saying hello. "Mr. Smith, we'd like a word," the taller one said. Lawrence didn't invite them in. He didn't have to. They walked like men who were used to being let through doors that should have stayed shut. "Is this about my holdings?" Lawrence asked, trying to keep his tone dry. "It's about Gino Chiellini," the shorter man said, "and how close you've gotten to him." Lawrence led them into the sitting room but didn't offer coffee or civility. The agents remained standing. "He's under federal surveillance," the taller one said. "You've seen his name before, but what you haven't seen is what's in the case we're building now." Lawrence's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "RICO," the agent continued, "organized crime, multiple fronts, and now your name's showing up beside his, on security footage, phone records, shared locations." "You're wasting your time," Lawrence replied, forcing his voice to stay steady. "I'm not in business with him." "But you are in contact," the other agent countered. "Which brings us to the real reason we're here." He reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed folder, placing it on the marble coffee table like it was a weapon. "We need your cooperation." Lawrence stared at it without touching it. "What kind of cooperation?" The first agent stepped forward, voice lowered. "Testify. Confirm a few meetings. Validate his movements. Nothing explosive. Just enough to solidify what we already suspect." Lawrence's silence stretched. "And if I don't?" The answer came swift and cold. "You're a single father of a baby girl," the agent said, "with a documented history of severe distress and a known felon around her. That's the kind of thing custody courts pay attention to." Lawrence flinched. Not visibly, but internally, like something sharp had scraped his ribs. "Is that a threat?" he asked. It's a possibility, the man said, calm as a surgeon. We're giving you a choice, your reputation or his freedom. Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, Lawrence could hear the faint sound of Rhonda cooing through the baby monitor. The juxtaposition made his stomach lurch. He wanted to scream. To tell them they didn't know Gino, not really. That the man they were painting as a monster was the only person who could make his daughter smile at midnight. But words felt dangerous now. Even the truth felt like evidence. I need time, Lawrence said, his voice a thread. You don't have much, the agent replied. We're filing indictments within the month. You're either on our side of the table, or you're sitting across from it. With that, they left, silent as shadows, but leaving thunder behind them. The door clicked shut like a verdict. Lawrence stood there for a long time, staring at the folder still resting on the table. He didn't open it. Didn't have to. The contents weren't just legal. They were personal. And somewhere inside, a new fear was beginning to replace the old one. What if they were right? He walked upstairs slowly, every step feeling heavier than the last. Rhonda was in her playpen, babbling softly, her toy drum resting beside her. She looked up when she saw him, her blue eyes wide and questioning. Lawrence sat down beside her and touched her hand. It was warm, sticky from teething, and so small he could cover it with just a thumb. She deserves better than both of us, Lawrence whispered aloud, though he didn't say who us meant. Himself. Gino, Carla, the ghosts that danced through her DNA. He didn't know anymore, but he knew this. He couldn't lose her. That night, as Gino's car approached the estate, Lawrence felt his chest tighten. He met him at the gate instead of the door. We can't do this tonight, Lawrence said. Something happened. Gino's face darkened. Rhonda? No, Lawrence said quickly. But she might not be safe if you keep coming here. They stood there in the gravel drive, moonlight slicing between them like a line drawn in dust. Lawrence explained everything about the agents, the surveillance, the file. Gino didn't interrupt, didn't flinch. He just listened, cigarette forgotten in his hand, burning low and dim. So this is it? Gino asked, voice low. They got to you. They threatened to take her, Lawrence said. Wouldn't you back off if someone threatened your family? Gino gave a bitter laugh. They already took mine. That's why I know backing off doesn't save anyone. Lawrence wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Because somewhere deep down he agreed. Silence didn't protect Rhonda, and neither did distance. But fear had a weight, and he was carrying it now like chains around his throat. A small noise cracked through the night. From the upstairs window, Rhonda's voice carried down, light and shaky but unmistakably a word. One word. One name. Gino. They both froze. Lawrence looked up slowly, chest hammering. Gino's mouth parted slightly, breath caught like he'd forgotten how to exhale. Did she just? Lawrence nodded once. Her first word. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Rhonda had said Gino. Not Mama. Not Data. Not even Drum. That name, his name, was the first her little voice had claimed. And in that moment, something inside both men shifted again. I'll go, Gino said finally. Not for them. For her. But you better think long and hard about what kind of man you want her first word to grow up remembering. Then he turned and walked away, not waiting for Lawrence to answer. If the person your child loved most became the target of a threat, would you protect them? Or protect your peace? Let us know in the comments. Should Lawrence betray Gino to keep Rhonda safe? Or is he about to make the biggest mistake of his life? The courthouse loomed like a mausoleum for choices. Lawrence stepped out of the black SUV, Rhonda cradled against his chest, her toy drum dangling from a loop on his wrist. Cameras flashed from across the street, questions flung like pebbles from behind barricades. Mr. Smith, are you here to testify against Gino Chiellini? Are you aware of his criminal history? Lawrence didn't respond. He didn't blink. He just walked through the glass doors as if silence were armor. Inside, marble walls reflected polished shoes and anxious heartbeats. The courtroom buzzed with tension, the kind that tightened shoulders and held breaths hostage. Gino was already seated at the defense table, wearing a charcoal suit and a look that said he'd expected to be alone. His lawyer whispered something, but Gino's eyes never left Lawrence. When Lawrence sat beside the prosecution's witness box, a visible ripple moved through the gallery. The judge cleared her throat. "Mr. Smith, are you prepared to proceed with your statement?" Lawrence stood slowly, hands steady, voice calm. "Yes, Your Honor. But I'm not here to condemn Mr. Chiellini. I'm here to defend him." A hushed wave of gasps swept the courtroom like wind through dry leaves. The prosecutor rose immediately, objecting. "Your Honor, Mr. Smith was subpoenaed as a corroborating witness." The judge raised her hand, silencing the room. "Mr. Smith may speak. I'll determine the relevance." Lawrence took a breath and began. "I was asked to testify to what I know of Mr. Chiellini's movements, habits, associations," he said. "What I know is that he held my daughter's hand when no one else could calm her." A pause. "What I know is that he taught her how to listen to the world by teaching her how to hear herself." His voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. Every person in the room leaned forward, like they were afraid to miss a single syllable. "She cried for days, weeks, screamed until her throat bled," Lawrence continued. "We tried everything, specialists, therapies, tools I paid a fortune for. But she only found peace when this man, this accused criminal, tapped a rhythm on an airplane armrest. And suddenly she was quiet. Not out of fear, but out of recognition." Gino didn't move, not a twitch, but Lawrence could feel the tension crackling in the air around him like static before a storm. "They say men like him don't change," Lawrence said, eyes scanning the jury. "They say proximity to danger makes you dangerous. But I've been close to men who wear suits and smiles and embezzle billions without blinking. I've been in rooms full of Ivy League sociopaths." He pointed to Gino without raising his arm. "This man is the first person my daughter ever said a word for. Her first word wasn't Dad. It wasn't Mom. It was Gino." A hush dropped over the courtroom like snowfall. "She felt safe," Lawrence continued, softer now. "That's all. No manipulation, no promises. Just presence. He showed up when the world told her to scream, and instead of asking her to stop, he offered her something worth staying quiet for." The judge leaned back in her chair, arms folded. The prosecutor said nothing. Gino looked down at the table like he didn't trust his own face to hold together. Rhonda babbled softly in the gallery, reaching one small hand toward the defense table. Lawrence smiled gently, then turned back to the court. "I'm not here to tell you he's perfect," he said. "I don't know everything he's done. But I know what he's done for her. And I know that a man capable of that kind of peace shouldn't be reduced to a headline." He stepped down without waiting to be dismissed. The silence he left behind was the loudest sound in the room. Outside, the courthouse steps were a battlefield of questions. Reporters surged forward, their voices desperate to catch something, anything usable. But all Lawrence did was open the car door, strap Rhonda into her seat, and close it quietly behind her. He turned once toward the flashing bulbs and shrieking microphones and said only, "He gave my daughter something I never could. That's all the testimony I need." Gino exited the building 10 minutes later. He wasn't in cuffs. His lawyer wore a faint, surprised smile. Reporters turned toward him like vultures scenting fresh air. But Gino didn't look at them. He looked at Rhonda watching through the car window, her tiny hand pressing the glass. He stepped closer, lowered his voice. "You did good, Bambina," he whispered. "Real good." Rhonda giggled and tapped the glass once, twice. The rhythm of a promise kept. The house was too quiet when Lawrence walked into the nursery. No soft rhythm from the crib rails, no hum of the white noise machine, no faint trace of Gino's laughter filtering through the baby monitor. Just Rhonda, asleep in a way that looked too still, as if even she sensed the absence before anyone said it aloud. On the dresser, beside her toy drum, lay a folded sheet of paper with Gino's handwriting scrawled in black ink. "She deserves a clean life. That ain't me." Lawrence read the note twice, then again, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something less final. His jaw clenched. It wasn't just an exit. It was a man trying to erase his presence for her sake. But erasing himself didn't erase what he'd given her. It didn't undo the rhythm she now carried in her bones. Downstairs, the back door hung slightly open, letting in a sliver of morning chill. Lawrence stepped through it and onto the lawn, the sky painted in the blue-gold haze of early light. Gino was already halfway down the gravel path leading to the gate, his shoulders hunched, his steps slow but sure. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. He had made up his mind. Lawrence didn't call after him, not yet. Something in him said to wait, to see. A moment passed, then another. Then the sound, small, sharp, undeniable, cut through the air like a bell. "Gino!" The voice was high-pitched, shaky, but loud enough to echo against the stone path. Gino froze. Another cry came, louder this time. "Gino! Gino!" Rhonda's voice, no longer a babble, but deliberate. Reaching, pleading. Gino turned slowly, and there she was. Barefoot, pajamas twisted, crawling across the lawn with arms outstretched and eyes locked on him like he was the only music left in the world. Her tiny palms slapped the grass in quick, desperate beats. She was crying, not out of fear, but from knowing he was leaving. Lawrence moved to catch her, but stopped. He couldn't look away. Gino dropped to his knees, stunned, watching her close the distance between them. By the time she reached his boots, she had only one word left. "Gino," she said again, her voice a whisper and a roar all at once. He reached down, hands shaking, and lifted her into his arms like she was made of glass. She clung to him, sobbing into his shoulder, tiny fingers digging into the lapel of his jacket. Gino held her there, eyes closed, breathing like the world had just broken open. "I was trying to protect you," he whispered, more to himself than her. "But I didn't ask what you wanted." Lawrence stepped forward, slowly, his throat tight. "She already chose," he said, voice low but firm. "We both did." Gino looked up, eyes rimmed red but steady. "I thought staying would bring danger, and leaving broke her," Lawrence replied. "You don't get to disappear from this." The wind stirred, rustling the trees above them like applause. Rhonda pulled back just enough to tap her open hand against Gino's chest. Twice, like she'd learned from him. Her version of don't go. Gino looked at Lawrence. "You sure?" "No," Lawrence said, "but I'm done letting fear make decisions for her." They walked back toward the house together. Gino with Rhonda still in his arms, Lawrence beside them, silent and resolved. Nothing had changed on paper, no case was closed, no past rewritten. But something invisible had shifted. In their rhythm, in their roles, in the wordless agreement that they were no longer pretending not to be family. That evening, the drum sat between them again. Rhonda tapped it gently while Gino played back the pattern, and Lawrence watched, for once not thinking about the cost of everything. Gino looked up at him, one eyebrow raised. "You know she's going to talk your ear off soon, right?" "Good," Lawrence said with a smile. "I've waited long enough to hear her voice." Let us know in the comments. Was Gino right to try and disappear? Or did Rhonda pull him back just in time? The sun slanted low over the Smith estate, casting golden light through the open French doors as laughter echoed through the garden. The backyard had been transformed into something small and perfect. Balloons tied loosely to the white picket fence, a simple banner reading, "Happy second birthday, Rhonda," swaying in the breeze. No photographers, no press, no corporate sponsors, or branded gift bags. Just family. Just rhythm. Rhonda sat cross-legged on a picnic blanket, a miniature drum in front of her and a cupcake in each chubby fist. She wore a soft yellow dress that fluttered around her legs as she swayed side to side, tapping her toy drum with both palms. Each beat was sure, steady, full of joy. Gino sat beside her, his own hands clapping along, not leading, just matching her pace, letting her guide the rhythm. She giggled, tossed her curls back, and yelled, "Again!" before thumping another beat. Lawrence stood a few feet away with a matchbook and a candle-topped cake, watching them both. His eyes, tired in the way only joy makes you tired, crinkled with something closer to peace than he'd known in years. No one would have guessed how far they'd come in 12 months, how close they'd come to falling apart. But now, here they were, rebuilt, not perfectly, but intentionally. "All right, birthday girl," Lawrence called, stepping forward with the cake. "You ready?" Rhonda squealed, dropping her drumsticks and raising her arms. Gino lifted her easily, balancing her on his hip as Lawrence set the cake down between them. 2 candles. 2 tiny flames flickering in the late afternoon light. 2 miracles. Lawrence lit the candle slowly, careful not to let the breeze win. "Okay, sweetheart," he said gently. "Make a wish." Rhonda leaned forward, eyes wide, cheeks puffed. Then, just as she began to blow, she turned her head slightly. "You too, Gino," she whispered. "You help." Gino blinked once, surprised. Then he smiled, tilted his head toward the cake, and together they exhaled, one slow, shared breath. The candles went out, smoke curled into the air like a ribbon of time. For a moment, no one said anything. Then Rhonda clapped and shouted, "We did it!" Applause followed, soft and real. Sarah, the housekeeper, handed out slices of cake. Lawrence poured lemonade. The quiet was filled with conversation and giggles, and the kind of love that didn't need explanation. Gino sat back, watching Rhonda bounce between people with frosting on her chin and purpose in her step. "She owns this whole yard," he said, grinning. "She owns this whole house," Lawrence replied, joining him at the table. "And probably our hearts too." Gino looked over. "Probably," Lawrence laughed. "Okay, definitely." A beat passed. "She calls you Nono G, you know," he added, casually. "Started last week." Gino's face shifted into something unreadable for a split second. Surprise. Maybe gratitude, maybe grief. "She's got good taste," he said, his voice just a little rough. "And you?" Lawrence asked. "You okay with that?" Gino looked at the girl, spinning in circles on the lawn with a party streamer around her wrist. "I've been called worse." As the sun dipped behind the hedge, painting everything in bronze and shadow, Lawrence stood and raised his lemonade glass. The backyard hushed, turning toward him with the easy attention of those who already knew what mattered. "To Rhonda," he said, 2 years of joy, noise, rhythm, and surprise." He looked at Gino. "To the people who didn't walk away when it would have been easier." He raised his glass higher. "To family. The kind you build. Not just the kind you're born with." Gino raised his glass back. "And to little girls who make us better men." Rhonda, still spinning, paused and threw her arms in the air. "To cake!" she yelled. Everyone laughed. Later, as twilight draped the estate in soft blue, Lawrence watched Gino help Rhonda carry her gifts inside. No cameras had captured the day. No headlines would follow tomorrow. But this rhythm, this chosen family, was louder than any legacy Lawrence had built before. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. There's another interesting one on your left screen that I think you'll really enjoy.